Hello, my name's Sabrina Moreland, and I'm one of the librarians at Walters State. And I'm going to give you some information that's going to help you with your literary research for American Literature 2. And I'm also going to touch a little bit on some MLA style information that might be helpful for you to apply at this stage in your research. So we'll go ahead and get started. And the first thing I want to do is just very quickly review some terminology. So of course we're going to be talking about databases a little bit and where to go to find the best information for this type of research. We're also going to be, thinking about types of sources. And so you generally want a scholarly article from an academic journal. There are chances, depending on the type of research you're doing, that you could use a magazine entry or something like that, or even a review of that adaptation of that work of literature you're researching. So it depends on the type of research you're doing. But generally, we're looking for literary criticism. And in the databases, I'm going to show you how to find some of that information. And then again, MLA format is the style you're going to be using to document where all of your secondary source information comes from, but even documenting the primary source, so that type of literature that you are researching, or that piece of literature rather. So, just like in English 1020, this is the good news. When you do research in the databases, you're going to be using similar access points that you learned about in English 1020, so Comp 2. So, for example, if I was researching this idea of American identity in The Last of the Mohicans by James Fenimore Cooper, I would plug that information into the databases. So you may have seen this already when you completed Comp 2. So we're just looking at those two access points and then adding whatever that technique or element is we're researching. So that should be really good news because you've already done that successfully in a previous course. So a couple other examples could be Stephen Crane is my author, access point. I'm looking at his novel Maggie, A Girl of the Streets, and I might be examining violence or poverty or her character development. Maybe in Henry James's The Turn of the Screw, I might be looking for death, paranoia, horror, terror, that sort of thing. I might be looking at multiple authors and multiple works with the same theme. So the point is that you're still going to plug in all of those access points in those databases to get the literary criticism that you're looking for. Now, touching a little more deeply on literary criticism, you might be taking a certain approach to literary criticism, so a type of literary criticism. You might be looking at a feminist approach. How is this, approach from that point of view or that perspective, or psychological, historical, deconstruction, so all these sort of traditional ways. And I have, writing women's literary history listed here. That's a whole book about that type of criticism applied to various texts. You might also, on the left, think about certain series or collections of literary criticism. Now, a lot of libraries, including Walter State's library, has physical collections of this types of criticism. However, you might be able to find some good collections and series in the ebook collection. I'm going to show you that a little bit later on. But 19th century literary criticism, when I was in school getting my English degree, that's where I went. We had the internet. So I would go to the library and I'd have to look up in the index where my work or author appeared, and I'd have to locate it in a certain volume. I actually loved it because I'm a big nerd. But there's all kinds of collections that exist. You might have heard of Harold Bloom's Modern Critical Views. There's all these critical surveys, long fiction, short fiction, poetry, drama, etc. So all kinds of collections that you could consider, and you could plug in, the type of criticism or the series you're looking for perhaps when you're doing research. So this is just an added level of I guess of how to do the research for this sort of upper level English course. Now the databases, you've seen, probably seen anyway, most of these already from previous classes. I have given your instructor videos for how to search in each of these. So Literature Resource Center, Literary Reference Center Plus, JSTOR, ebook academic collection. You should have seen all of those. So if you are comfortable using them, of course, you don't feel like you have to watch those videos. So I have just done sample demonstrations of how to do research in each of these. Now, EBSCOhost may or may not be new to you. I've included it because there are different ways of searching literary databases within this large branch of EBSCOhost. So that was one I would probably take a look at just to see how to search that. And then American National Biography, you're probably not doing a biographical sketch of your author, poet, whoever, but sometimes if we're looking at the context of that author's life, this might be a good place to go, or you're wanting to understand that time period, or maybe what that author went through. So I have included that to a video for American National Biography because it could be helpful depending on the type of research you're doing. So in addition to this presentation, there are also videos for each of these databases on how to search those if you're interested. Now, MLA style, you've been using that for years, I'd say, on documenting where your information comes from. I just wanted to do a quick review on where to find help and just a couple other elements that might be refreshers as well for this type of writing. So, of course, there's an MLA guide on the library website that you can visit. And it has some very basic information on how to do parenthetical and in-text citations and how to set up that works cited page. The Purdue OWL site is fantastic. I go there all the time just to, find random things I need to document that I may not have memorized, but lots of good information there. And then you may have borrowed or purchased an MLA handbook. So all good places to go. And of course, you can ask a librarian. So I'm always happy to help with any documentation questions you may have. Now this is just a recap on some formatting tips. So in the paper itself, all titles are centered. You have to use Times New Roman 12-point font, no spaces between paragraphs, 1-inch margins. You will have your page number listed on the top right with your name included. And there's some information on that on the LibGuide that we have in the library as well. And then your works cited page, so the last page of your paper, is titled Work Cited if you've only cited one work or one secondary source, primary source, and then or it's works cited if there's more than one. And so it's not underlined, it's not italicized, there's no quotation marks around it, it's very basic. And then you will have a hanging indent. It'll be double spaced, and you want to watch those spaces between paragraphs. And so all of that, of course, is listed for you on these different helpful pages. So that's just a reminder for those two elements. Now, in-text and parenthetical citations, that appears in the body of your work. And so you'll be using the author page method to cite that in your paper. And so there is a slight difference between the two. An in-text citation is where the author's name is actually written in the sentence that you're either paraphrasing or quoting. And then a parenthetical citation, all that information, the author and the page number, is in the parentheses at the end of what you've just said. And remember that you have to cite your sources when you both use a direct quotation and when you paraphrase. So even if you're putting it in your own words, it's still somebody else's idea that you are including in your paper. So this is just an example from, I think this is the Comp 2 textbook, but the white there, the Edgar Allan Poe entry at the top, that is what my works cited entry would look like. I'd have the author, the title of the book, the edition, the editor, so forth, all of that listed. So that's on my works cited page. Now, if I were utilizing this in my paper, in the body of my paper, I have an example of an in-text citation. So Poe informs the reader, and so forth. And then I have 433. So Poe is in the text, and the page number is in the parentheses. Now, using the same concept, the same information down here, I have my quote, but I did not start off with, Poe. I have a signal phrase, and then I have Poe 433 in the parentheses. So same information, just a different way of presenting that. Now, the secondary source, so your primary source, of course, is your story, your poem, your play, your novel, whatever it is you're talking about. But your secondary source is those articles, that literary criticism that you find. And so this is an example of what my works cited entry would look like for an article I found on Poe. Again, examples of in-text and parenthetical. According to Garrison, right, there's his name, blah, 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 page 146, right? Same thing, Poe utilizes terror and horror, so I'm quoting Garrison 146. So name is in the text up here, everything is in the parentheses here. So that's just an example of, another example rather, of a works cited entry with an in-text and parenthetical citation. Now, there's a lot of information on this slide. If you're repeating a source, so in your in-text citation, if you only have one source listed in the whole of your essay or in the paragraph, then you would only have to write that author's last name one time. So here I have Poe to show this quote, but I've used Poe again, same source down here. So if I were to continue writing and using just Poe, the primary source, I could continue just to put the page numbers, and that shows the reader or your instructor that you've only used this one source. Now, of course, if you use more than one source in a chunk of your paper, then you have to put both or however many authors you've used. So I have Poe 4-33 and I have Garrison 146. So that's just a rule of MLA that you may or may not have been aware of. If you're using an indirect source, we see this a lot in many of the articles that we use. So using a quote that is cited elsewhere, you use the phrase quoted in here, sort of abbreviated, to indicate where it was from, right? So an example would be, not all readers of horror fiction are enamored with Poe's works. Author Henry James claimed that an enthusiasm for Poe is the mark of a decidedly primitive stage of reflection, quoted in Garrison. So Garrison has quoted what Henry James has said about Poe's writing. So that's how, an example of how you do that. If in those secondary sources you run into other really good quotes that you want to use. These are just a couple links to some extra practice if you want to play some MLA games or just look at what other libraries have maybe put together in regards to MLA. Of course, you don't have to. Maybe you're looking for a fun Saturday night, but I've just included those other sources of practice for you to take a look at. And lastly, here's all of my contact information. Because of this being an online course, of course, you can call me, you can email me, or you can use my name in the class list if I'm embedded in your class. But all kinds of ways of seeking help from a librarian, and please do not hesitate if you have any questions on not being able to find sources, or you need some good keywords generated, or you need help with those citations. That's what I'm here for. And again, I have also sent your instructor several videos on how to use those databases, so please take a look at those, and thank you for listening.